Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And a very warm welcome and good morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And this morning we are joined by none other than Mr. Rusiripala Tennakoon, who is going to be telling us or commenting on the state of the state banks. Very good morning to you, Mr. Rusiripala.
Good morning, Faraz.
What indeed is the state of the state banks?
Yes, state banks has become the very hot subject these days. I've seen many articles in financial circles circulating, written, commenting about the state of affairs of the state banks. And the issue is, focus is on how they fulfill the requirements, the regulatory requirements of the Bank for International Settlements, the regulatory requirements, which become periodically applicable to all banks in the world operating in the international scenario. So the focus today is widely and mainly on this aspect, whether the state banks in Sri Lanka can conform to the regulatory requirements of the BIS. So I have seen many...
The BIS is this the Basel Agreement.
The Basel Agreement. Actually, the Basel Agreement is a result of the Bank of International Settlements, Bank for International Settlements, and they periodically meet and then pass regulations which are applicable to banks that are operating in the international scenario. In other words, which are engaged in international business.
Right.
So our state banks naturally are involved in import-export business. So that is international.
Right.
I mean, by international business we mean they are engaged in export and import businesses. So to that extent, they are covered by these regulatory requirements. The debate that is going on today, strangely, is whether we should abide by those and whether they are justified. I mean, that's what I read in an article.
Well, the chairman of the HMB Bank, Dinesh Virakodi, says there is no debate. The country needs bigger and stronger banks. Yes and no, or what?
Country needs banks and banks are there. The problem is whether the banks which are there are performing to that required standard. The size of the bank was never an issue in this country because they have been able to meet all the requirements domestically as well as internationally up to now, except for the fact that they have been acting rather in a independent manner of their own, directed by the government to do what the government wants and not the bank, what the bank regulations want. So they have fallen into some difficulty.
But Mr. Rusiripala, from time to time we read about this in the press, we hear it on television and radio, that apparently some of these advances, loans, given by the state banks to state-owned enterprises are never paid back. Those debts are not transferred to non-performing loan status and therefore to be taken off the books, off the balance sheets, and so a false sense of equilibrium is being made when this doesn't happen. For example, you can talk about the debts to Sri Lankan Airlines. And are supposed to be in Lanka.
Absolutely, you are there on the point. Because one of the major issues confronting the state of the state banks is the direction from the government to lend to government institutions. And this has been there. This is not a recent thing. Even in the 90s, when the banks were declared bankrupt, virtually bankrupt, in no other place other than the Parliament of Sri Lanka, the Minister of Finance then,
who was it?
Mr. Vijayatunga, late Mr. Vijayatunga. He said that the state banks are bankrupt, and today's Prime Minister was a senior minister in that cabinet. He endorsed it. And he spoke for hours, Hansard will show this, spoke for hours in support of their statement. You know, all that arose as a result of 2 audit reports that were given by 2 international audit firms then about the Bank of Ceylon and about the People's Bank. The audit reports very clearly pointed out that the bank's lending has not been in keeping with the accepted norms and regulatory requirements then. And the books, as you rightly said now, were reflecting not the correct position that a bank should reflect.
Right.
Like non-transferring of the non-performing loans into that section. Because they were showing inflated profits falsely. Because the moment you keep a NPL or a loan that should be transferred to the non-performing section in the current section, you, in other words, what you are doing is the interest income that is generated or receivable from such a loan is reflected as a true income of the bank.
Right.
Whereas it is not the case. They are not recovering those. And you were mentioning about the lending to the most recent thing, lending to the Sri Lankan Airlines. Now, Faraz, I don't know whether you call them loans or whether they call them bank grants, you know. Because if it is a loan, you are guided by certain regulatory requirements and then certain guidelines and certain norms and ethics in banking. When you are just directed to lend by an authority above you, you don't have to look for those requirements. What has happened in the Sri Lankan thing is to recuperate, to recover, to safeguard that institute from falling into further mess. They have ordered the banks, the two state banks, okay, you lend so much. Against what? Now in lending, the basic elementary thing is you make an assessment about the borrower. You know, if you don't make an assessment about the borrower and you don't formulate your lending policy accordingly, you are not lending, you are granting. But if you do an assessment, this Sri Lankan Airlines has a negative net worth of 70 billion rupees.
A negative net worth of 70 billion rupees.
No bank in the world worth its name would lend to such an institution. Unless of course there is a guarantee by somebody which is in acceptable form.
So in this case, that somebody is the state.
They give a piece of paper which is called a letter of comfort. And against that letter,
that's given by the Treasury.
And the banks are under compulsion, compulsorily to lend to these institutions, disregarding all the lending norms. They don't have to go into the balance sheets of the borrower. They don't have to go into the future possibilities of projected possibilities of the recovery of the institution's financial status.
So these ignoring of the norms when it comes to lending money, does it also extend to private individuals?
I don't think so. Unless there is political pressure, which was also one of the things accused or alleged during that time. Unless that prevails now, you see, it's quite possible. You know, these politicians are everywhere.
So does it make it right by, for example, let's say the Minister of Finance, this is entirely hypothetical, let's say the Minister of Finance submits a cabinet paper and seeks the agreement and the concurrence of his colleagues in cabinet, and it's passed, does it then become all right to break the rules?
Well, I don't think when the Minister of Finance wants to do a thing like that, he doesn't have to go to the cabinet.
It's his own decision.
He will give a directive. That's what has been happening. I mean, if it goes to the cabinet, fair enough, Faraz, because there will be a...
So if you were to go to the Bank of Ceylon and ask for a 300 million urgent requirement that you have, and you tell them, look, I'm expecting the government to settle a bill of mine at some point, and the Treasury writes to them and says, well, we are in discussions, but we don't really care whether you give a loan or we don't give, because it's not their domain. You know, they're not the risk committee of the bank. Right. So, is it okay? My question is it okay if the cabinet says it's okay? Is it okay?
No, the point is, you know, it's not what the cabinet says for it to become okay.
Yeah.
The assessment in banking terms about the lending and how safe and how risk-free it is the thing that matters.
The reason I'm asking this question is because one of the favorite defenses of everybody has been, but the cabinet agreed. Everybody, whatever it is, whether it's a loan or whether it's some procurement, some amazing expenditure, maybe perhaps like the Surya cricket stadium, which appeared to have no rhyme or reason, and the popular belief is that Namal Rajapaksa is the one who wanted this thing done. That's just a belief, okay? I'm not saying that it was him, but they say that, and then eventually, finally, when all is said and done, everyone says, "Oh, but I had cabinet approval."
Well, I don't know in this instance whether they have taken refuge under that cover, under that.
So the state banks are not doing that?
No, the state banks don't have to. What they say is they have to make their own assessment because there is a certain independence that is granted to them to work competitively in the field like any other commercial bank in taking commercial decisions.
So what about the Bank of Ceylon? When they gave, when they funded that exercise, that bond with perpetual treasuries, they made a proxy bid on behalf of perpetual, but they used their money. So in effect, it was kind of an advance. How would that have come about?
No, well, in that instance, it's a very peculiar situation. I don't see any sort of a violation there as such, but there has been some kind of a favoration there, undue favoration. Right. That's all. But the bank never ran a risk in doing that.
Yes, because they had the bond.
They had the bonds, In any case, it was at a very lower price.
Right.
They knew if the bank got it, they would have earned the same amount of money like the perpetual treasuries. What they did subsequently. What they did was, what was bad was, they only held that on for a short time and passed it on to the perpetual treasuries to make their profits.
So is it, Mr. Rusiripala, how bad is this issue of the state banks being owed money by other state institutions, and it's so bad that it should be transferred as a non-performing loan, but it's not, and it remains on the books, and like you say, the interest due is calculated as income.
Yes,
or receivable.
Now, for us, the worst situation here is actually in a true audit. This should have been reflected by way of a comment on the part of the auditors that this wrong practice is being continued, because there are certain guidelines given by the regulator in Sri Lanka for banking, which is the central bank, which gives very specifically the terms and how a loan should be treated to keep it either in the current section or in the NPL section. Now, there is, besides the fact that it becomes non-performing, if the borrowing institution has fallen short of the financial standards and requirements, like becoming having a negative asset worth or net worth, I mean that itself is a reason for the bank to transfer it to the NPL section. The state banks have totally disregarded this. Because of the guarantee that is given, they are hanging on to this piece of paper, the comfort letter that is given by the treasury, which means, yes, if the government says we give, even the bank goes bust or even if it is against all the regulations, we give it. This is what has happened. Now in this case, you take 48 billion rupees worth funding has been given to Sri Lankan Airlines by the two state banks.
Right.
One bank 28 billion, the other bank 21 billion. Now these remain in the books of the bank for the last, I think, 1.5 years or 2 years.
Can the airline service these loans?
This is the obvious question of ours.
Yeah.
If they can, Now they won't be grouping in this situation. No, they are now trying to find buyers to do this. They are trying to find investors. They are trying to regularize their affairs. They are discontinuing their CEOs. They are doing all kinds of things. You know, but that shows, in simple terms, the Sri Lankan Airlines is not in a position to repay these facilities, which ultimately ends up with the situation that it is the treasury that will bear the burden, and it is our money finally.
So yet another indirect tax on the people.
Definitely, it is definitely a direct tax. You know, if ever the treasury has to write off these huge amounts.
Yeah.
I mean, that is definitely a burden really on the people. There is no qualification necessary for that. People have to pay for it.
The people have to pay for it, and we have to go for a break.
Yes.
Don't go away. After all, this is Newsline. And welcome back to Newsline, where we are in conversation with Mr. Rusiripala Tennakoon. I'd just like to tell you, at the Ministry of Media, the Media Ministry has made some staff announcements, and they include Ruan Ferdinand, Head of Media Operations and Senior Media Advisor to the Minister, Ishini Wickramasinghe, Private Secretary and Media Relations Officer to the Minister, Samantha Pereira, Coordinating Secretary, Keshal Jayasinghe, Coordinating Secretary on Social Media, and CSK Tushara, Coordinating Officer, Research and Monitoring. There you go. That's the world of impacting at the Media Ministry for our colleagues in the media. Now then, Mr. Rusiripala, you were talking about the state banks and the state of affairs, because obviously now, so what will happen? The Sri Lankan Airlines loans, for example, do you think it'll ever get paid to the state banks?
So you see, there is another aspect to this for us that we must look into.
Yeah.
Besides this lending to these government institutions which are virtually bankrupt,
yeah,
or going down the drain gradually, you know, there is another thing that is happening to the state banks as a result of this.
Right.
You take the lending portfolio of the state banks. 70% of their lending is to government institutions. That means, what does it mean? It has totally deviated from the functions and the tasks that as objectives that were given to the banks during their formative years. They were formed, they were created to do a certain specific function for the people in this country,
yeah,
to bring up the economy and to assist the development functions of this country. They have totally deviated from that function. They can talk, they can put an advertisement in the papers and say, oh, we are going to entertain applications for SMEs, this, that. I mean, these are all eyewash tactics.
Do they have the money?
No, they have money to advertise, they do that.
Yeah.
But in effect, is that happening in the country? For example, you take the People's Bank. The People's Bank was formed to serve the cooperative movement in this country. In other words, you forget the cooperative movement,
yeah,
to serve the rural population,
yeah,
which were not open to banking industry,
yeah,
or banking practices. You know, the banks were something alien to them. They were not getting bank facilities, assistance. So the purpose of the People's Bank was to serve them. I am asking the question today, to what extent have they deviated from that function today? Are they doing that service, or have other banks,
yeah,
gone into that area,
yeah,
captured a large segment of that business by way of deposits coming from poor people?
Yeah.
4% they are paying. What are the deposits? The deposits are the savings accounts, you know, of these people. You take the portfolio of savings in a state bank. The large majority comes from the village ordinary people by way of savings accounts. What is the interest they are paying? 4%. And with the new taxation, they are charging some 5% from that also.
Right.
Right. 4%. Now, as against that money, they are lending to the same poor people by way of pawning advances against pawning of jewellery at 18%.
So there's a spread of about 14%.
14%. Now this is what I say. How much of this money is pumped back into the economy? How much of this money goes into the development? Or is this money once again goes into the financing of the downtrodden or the bankrupt, the institutions that are going bankrupt or wasting monies in the state sector? Paddy Marketing Board, Lak Satosa. Then you take, I mean, there are institutions like this, Lanka.
Yeah.
How much? A sum of 10 billion is there as amount lent to these three institutions by the People's Bank alone. I would ask the Auditor General to please go into the accounts and see whether any of these loans outstanding are reflected in the non-performing sections. Today, Mihinna happens to be a liquidated company for us.
Yeah.
There's a commission sitting on it.
Yeah.
And that commission, there are strange things happening in that commission also.
Yeah.
The things that diverge there. Number of board of direct members in the board that should be there and how it was registered. All those things are coming to light. And the banks have gone and lent billions to that institution. And those loans remain in the books of the banks as current loans. If I am not mistaken. This is a matter that has to be looked into. And if the Auditor General has not looked into this aspect, I think we hold the Auditor General in this country in most esteemed respect.
Yes,
personally,
in the highest regard.
Highest regard, personally, me. But I think his staff should look into this. His staff should look into this aspect because...
Perhaps they are, but they're very tight-lipped until they finish their investigations.
But this has been happening over the last 2-3 years for us.
Yes.
High time, and so many bank annual reports have come out in between. Now, if an international audit firm like Arthur D. Little or Bruce Allen Hamilton could in their reports highlight the fact that these things are not kept or accounted for in the manner they should be done, why can't the Auditor General Sri Lanka do that?
Indeed.
Is he a different auditor? I think there are lots of things, if the Auditor General looks into carefully in the accounts of the state banks, I mean, they should be brought to some extent to do their performance in the way that it is expected to be done.
Mr. Rusiripala, I hear you, and I hear what you say, and now I'm thinking rapidly here. In that case, what's all this controversy about the GDP figures? First we had the debt to GDP ratio. The governor of the central bank and the Minister of Finance in their annual reports, they state that it's about 77.6%. The ratio between GDP, the debt to GDP. However, the Auditor General has qualified the Ministry of Finance statements by saying that certain figures, he disagrees with the debt figure, and he gives why, and he puts all the other figures that they've not included, and he then says that it's actually 81%.
Yes.
Who do we believe?
No, naturally for us, if there is a disparity between the figures that are supplied to the central bank by the authorities and what is determined or detected by the Auditor General, obviously this difference in the GDP would appear because it's calculated on the figures that are given to the central bank, whereas it should have been calculated on the actual figures that have been found by the Auditor General. I remember about a year ago when we were discussing about this bond affair, at some stage or the other, the Auditor General very clearly stated that the total debt position reflected in the books of the Finance Ministry differed from what he has detected. So this arises from that story. This is nothing new. When the debt figures are not what they should be, and the resulting GDP figure naturally changes.
But some people say, some people also from the finance industry, they say to me, well, actually there are two figures, because the Auditor General has included the Minister of Finance has only dealt with government debt, and he's not put in the debt. The Auditor General is adding the debts of the some of the state-owned enterprises.
Yeah.
Is that fair comment?
Well, I mean, I do not know how you differ this, because if the state-owned enterprises own some money, to anybody, or if they borrow, they do borrow it with the sanction of the people, the treasury.
Yeah.
And I do not know how you can dissociate that as a liability of the government. Once you give a letter of guarantee and a letter of comfort, you have to stand by it.
This is what we call sovereign guarantees.
This virtually amounts to you are having to repay it in the event you default it.
Right.
You see, so therefore, I don't see any logic in anybody, any financial authority saying or disclaiming liability on a letter of comfort that is given.
Yeah.
Oh, that should not be included as a total liabilities of the government.
Yeah.
I think that should even come into the Appropriation Act amounts.
Oh, okay.
In reality, if the Appropriation Act says that this is the total borrowing of the government for this year, I think even the letters of comfort that are granted in between that period, applicable period, should cover that amount adequately and be within that limit. So they can't say, oh well, this is just a letter of comfort, we go and get a bank to go and give it. But the actual relevant issue and the question is, Faraz, if that bank is not repaid by the borrowing institution, the SOE, the state-owned enterprise, who pays it ultimately? Unless you want the bank to write it off and go bankrupt, which is the likely situation that we are faced with.
Goodness me, is it that serious?
That is definitely. I'm going by the history. We have this experience coming from 1992, Faraz. We are living in the same country. And you know, the government took so much of effort to sort of bring the banks into this focus and to tell them, give them the independence that they wanted to play in a equal playing field, level playing field along with the other commercial bank and take commercial decisions. The question I am asking today is, are these decisions commercial decisions of the bank?
Very quickly, because we just got 1 minute. In that, it says here that the Bribery Commission says that investigations will be further delayed due to the delay in holding a debate with regard to the Commissions of Inquiry Act in Parliament. One of the effects of this would be that some of the recommendations of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into the bond scam, the investigations called for in that report, will be delayed until this debate is held in Parliament.
I think this is a very important legal issue that has to be examined very carefully, but from what the little that we know, when a commission report recommends certain affairs, I think it's the Parliament that has to sanction it finally.
Right.
For it to become, operative through the other bodies, organs like the Bribery Commission and so on.
Right.
I think there is, you and I see, inaction on the part of the Bribery Commission to initiate certain actions arising out of recommendations made by the Bond Commission. So this may be due to this reason, and those people at the helm of affairs may be deliberately delaying this because they are playing for time.
Playing for time, that's something that we've run out. Rusiripala Tennakoon, thank you very much for being on Newsline. And that's the way it was on Newsline. And we wish you a wonderful weekend ahead. Take care and God bless.
Thank you.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.